In this tutorial we are going to see how a generic workspace works. What does it mean for generic workspace? We said that Magic Automa works with any application. So everything that we will see in the generic workspace will be valid for any application. We said that Magic Automa it is a specialized application for video editors, but it can still control any application. So everything we will see in this tutorial applies to any application, even video editing applications. Let's go create our workspace. To give a very simple example, let's use a classic Windows application that can be the Notepad. We have created a workspace dedicated to Notepad. When we create a generic workspace, these macros are created, which are also presented in the voice command and in the transport keys. We have the cycle panel available, the command panel to connect the tablet. Even if the macros are already there, let's create new macros ourselves in order to see how they are created and to understand command by command what they do. In the empty space of the macro panel we click with the right mouse button. The menu opens and we choose the option Create New Macro with Wizard. Let's select Application Activate and see what it does. You see no action because the application Notepad was already open in the foreground. Let's take the Notepad to the background and apply the macro again. If I click Active Application, it brings the Notepad to the foreground. Let's create a macro for the application Maximize command. It selects the target application and makes it maximized, then to the maximum of the window. Let's create a macro for the application menu command. We apply and see that the menu is activated. Let's create a macro for the application Minimize command. You saw that it downplayed our target application. Let's create a macro for the application Restore command. To see the effect of application Restore, we must first minimize our application. Now we see that application Restore brings the application back to the foreground. When we create macros, we must be aware that this series of commands can also be used together to create a complex macro. Now we are going to build a complex macro to see a little of these functions put together what they can do. A macro can simply consist of a single command line. But it can also be complex with multiple command lines cascaded between them. We create a macro and use the command text, which is used simply to insert a text in an editable field. We insert the text to be displayed. Let's change the name of the macro by modifying these two fields. One is the name of the macro and the other is the label on the button. Let's try the macro. You can see that by applying the macro, Notepad is activated and the desired text is typed in it. Now we do not create a new macro, but we continue add insert commands into this macro. We select the keyboard command to simulate pressing a key from the keyboard. We enter this text box and type Control under which in Windows selects all the text. Let's try the macro. We entered a text and selected it all by simulating keyboard stroke combination Control and A. Let us create a new line with the copy command and try the macro. Write the new text, selected it all and copied it into memory. Let us check if it is really copied into memory by opening another notepad and pasting the memory. Now let us add a cut command. Then we make it write the text. When we press Ctrl and A, we make it copy to memory and we make it cut in from memory. Let's try the macro. Write, select, copy and cut. Now let's see the difference between the message and confirm commands. Message creates a message and waits for the user to click OK. However, the confirm requires a choice from the user, either close or continue. If the user presses continue, the macro continues. If the user presses close, the macro stops. So the difference between message and confirm: message can be used to wait, confirm instead is used to wait for user confirmation. Let us add a new line with the message command to make sure that a message is shown. We add a line with the command confirm in order to request a confirmation. Let us add a new line with the paste command in order to paste the text from the clipboard. Let us try the macro. We see that the message is executed and waits for the user to press OK. Then the confirmation request, yes or no, is displayed. Let us try the macro and see that pressing no stops the macro and the text will not be pasted. Let us try the macro again by choosing continue and then the text is pasted. So we see that the macro continues if the user selects continue and stops if the user chooses close. Let us create a new line and always select the keyboard command. Click with the mouse in the text box. And press the Enter key. And let's say we want to press it 3 times. The window option if used forces to focus on a given window. In the case of a generic application I have two choices. If I select No before simulating the pressure of the key, I do not select any window. If I select Application Main before simulating the pressure of the key, I bring the main application to the foreground. In this case the notepad. We try the macro and we see that we have added to the macro the 3 times press of the Enter key inside the notepad. Now let's add a test line and try the macro. You have seen that after pressing Enter 3 times he wrote End. Let's create a new line with the undo command. The undo command undoes the last operation performed, simulates Ctrl-Z. Let's try the macro. You saw that he wrote End but then he pressed Ctrl-Z, so he cancelled the writing. Let's create a new line with the command Pause. Which is expressed in milliseconds, so if we want a 3-second pause we enter 3000. The command pause is important when we have to slow down a complex macro in order to give a pause between one line and the other, which by default is 100 milliseconds. This last command pause needs to be moved up between message and confirm, so that once the message is OK, there is a wait of 3 seconds before executing the confirm command. Let's try the macro. I click on OK before the confirmation message. It was executed immediately. Now wait 3 seconds. Let's see the difference between the commands keyboard and keyboard send key. With the keyboard command I position myself inside this box with the mouse and press the required key sequence. However, using the keyboard send key, it still has the possibility to select on which window to apply the key press, but in the string field I have to specify a string sequence of the keys to be pressed. To compose the string you can look at the examples below. Let's take an example by making the user press Alt and E to activate the edit menu. Let's try the macro. It was quick and it didn't show up, but it simulated pressing the Alt and E keys. We add another line in the macro so that the tab key is pressed 3 times. We insert the string tab between curly brackets. Let's try the macro. It is not seen, but tab has been pressed 3 times. Let's create a line with the run command, which runs an application. We can specify to launch an application with parameters. In our first example, we simply write www.magicautoma.com. We run the macro and see that I open the default browser and open the specified page. If we want to create a macro that does not launch the default browser but for example Firefox, we go to select Firefox and then as a parameter we put www.magicautoma.com. Here we also have the option to run the command as administrator. Let us try the macro and see that the specified web page is opened but with the Firefox browser, not with the default browser. The run command is used to run any desktop application, even specifying parameters. For example, if you want to run EDS with the project, select EDS and the project name as a parameter. Do we want to launch Vegas? Let's select Vegas and try the macro. You see Vegas runs. Let's create a macro with the system command. There are a number of predefined macros that open Windows panels, as in this case the Windows sound properties. Let's try the macro and see that the Windows sound properties panel is opened. I want to create a macro that opens the task manager for me. You see that the task manager is opened. I want to create a macro that opens the system properties. You will see that the system properties panel opens. Let's create macros with the macro command. The macro command launches an existing macro, then the macros we have already created are available in the list. For example, let's create a new line that opens the Windows sound properties. Together with another line within the macro command that makes me open the macro we created to open the system properties. So let's run this macro, which launches two macros. As you can see, two macros were executed. Magic Automat from this version also uses scripts. I select my script file, which is nothing more than a kind of programming language that we are going to see in a dedicated tutorial. The script command needs a separate tutorial because it is quite advanced, as we also have a script editor built into Magic Automa. We have the possibility to create macros with the mouse. We have to select the type of operation with the mouse, positioning, left click, right click, or double click. All commands refer to mouse click. You can see that the mouse position indicator changes, and when I click with the mouse it changes the value we have in the stored position. Then I create a macro that positions the mouse in the position 253, 158. Let's try the macro and see that the mouse is moved to the desired position. Let's go and modify this macro. With the go-to key it shows us what is the selected position. However, we can also create a macro with which you click with the left button. With the right button or double click, let's try to use this double click. Save the macro. Now let's try the macro. You saw that the double was performed at the specified point. When you change this option, it means that the position of the mouse is no longer absolute but is relative to the position of the selected window. The mouse last position commands are quite special macros and are especially useful when we are going to create complex macros. These commands refer to the last position where the user clicked within the target application. In the tutorial related to the macro recorder live, they are further explained. Let's create a double last position mouse macro. This macro executes a double mouse click in the last position of the click, executed in the target application window before executing the macro. Let's click on the word macro. You see these two numbers. The one on the left indicates the current position of the mouse, the one in brackets indicates where the last mouse click occurred, and that's what interests us most. Clicking on the word macro, we have memorized the position of the word macro. Note that by applying the macro, a double click is made in that position. Let's take another example and click on complex. Let's try the macro again and see that the word complex is double clicked. So these commands are very important to understand. Let's create another macro that positions the mouse in the last point click before executing the macro. We see that the mouse is positioned in the last point clicked before running the macro. The last command, move object, moves the mouse from one position to another on the screen. We have to memorize the starting and ending positions to establish the two starting and ending points of the mouse. Then click on Memorize Initial Position and click on the point to memorize. Same thing for the final position, we select and click on the point to memorize. We have memorized an initial position and a final position. So this macro will move the object, which in this case is a video clip, from one point to another. Let's try the macro. You see that the clip has been moved from the start position to the end position. As for the generic commands, we have explained everything. Thank you.